If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, those of you who work night shifts, what is the scariest thing you have experienced? I was working day shift on a drilling rig in the middle of nowhere. The rig manager comes to me and tells me I have to switch to nights on boiler watch to supervise the new guy and make sure all the assigned tasks are completed. Apparently he failed to complete his shit list the night before. So now I'm on nights. I work with this kid and he seems good. A guy with a solid work ethic. I can't understand why he failed the previous night. We completed all the work inside and now it was time to go get a few things done outside. I tell him let's get after oil changing that loader. He tells me that he can't work outside in the dark. I kinda laugh and say we are definitely going to go do that oil change. He is scared. Real fear. I ask him why and he tells me. Keep in mind that the rig is in the middle of nowhere. Hours to the closest small town out of the bush. His story went like this. He had done everything asked of him inside and went and started working out of the buildings on the lease outside. He got hungry so he grabbed his lunch. He left an apple on the hood of the truck and walked away for a few minutes. When he came back, the apple was still on the hood of the truck, but there was now a bite out of it. He looked on the ground and there were human shoe prints leading out of the trees, to the truck and back into the trees. We are in the middle of nowhere and there is no way someone should be out there in the bush in that temperature at that time if night. So I start thinking. That means somebody was watching him from the darkness of the trees, and took the time to mess with him. This person is either the funniest guy alive or a super strange bush man. Looking at where we were, the chances of him being the funniest guy ever were very slim. So now we have a strange man in the bush watching us. As a 6'4" plus 260-pound rig hand, I'm weirded right out by this story. Sent a shiver up my spine when I realized how that must have gone down. We went and the footprints were still there. We changed the oil, but we both had pipe wrenches as weapons in case we had a visitor. Still creeps me out to this day. Working in a hospital late at night building a new cabinet for IT. On a deserted ward, all patients were 3 floors below and the only access to the ward area was via smart card or fit onto a door fob inside the doors. So, only people inside the ward can let anybody in. The layout of the ward is that it's completely open without any beds or kit in it, and the only cupboard was the one I was in, with the door propped open with a fire extinguisher. So I was working on installing the UPS, very ducking heavy, into the rack, and the door to the cupboard shuts. I think, I must have kicked the fire extinguisher or something. I put the UPS down, and open the door, and the fire extinguisher is, just, gone. I look around, and it's deserted. No noise, didn't hear anything. Fire extinguisher has just atomized into the ether. I call security, because I am potentially alone with a person who just lifted a fire extinguisher and might want to murder me with it. I ask them to check cams and sure enough, some blurry object, according to them, swooped and picked up the fire extinguisher and ran off to the left. There are only 2 doors in and out of the ward, and you need a smart card to get in and out. I checked mine was still on my person and it was. So, whatever or whomever it was must have had one or some kind of device to spoof the RFID chip reader. I had security run the access control logs, and sure enough an entry in the list corresponds with roughly the time the fire extinguisher disappeared. I never got an answer as to what happened before I left to work elsewhere. Spooky. Lol, okay, it was scary to me at the time, but also as an acknowledgement, I was incredibly sleep deprived. Often getting at worst 3 hours of sleep in a 48 hours period and at best 20 hours combined sleep in a week. So I was a little bit delusional. In the middle of Denver, 3 a.m., I was convinced Bigfoot was hiding in the bushes behind my company car. I had to go back into the office and fashion a crude weapon from a steel pipe and electrical tape. By the time I was finished, he had left. The other time, this was reoccurring, was in Arizona, still sleep deprived. My office was near a defunct morgue, the 2 buildings shared an alley. I always worked alone, but something would play with the elevators. Random floors, doors opening, that sort of thing. Dark figures would stalk the aisles of equipment but vanish when I chased after them. But the best/worst part was when I became convinced that ghosts and demons would have a monthly party on the top floor of the disused adjoining building. I had plans to infiltrate, but I needed a disguise. It was all very terrifying, even if it's funny in hindsight. I switched to an evening/mid shift soon after that, started getting regular sleep, and it all went away. Never made it to that party either. I was a caregiver at a number of facilities, one of which had 8 mobility and cognitively impaired ladies. I tucked one in, as I did 5 nights a week, and she started laughing rather ominously, not unusual for her. Let's call her M. I asked what was so funny and Em replied, "Right behind you." I turned and looked nothing. Em already had her glasses off and was nearly blind, so I suggested maybe she'd seen a shadow from the trees outside the window. This happened occasionally in the night or early morning and it terrified Em until you got her glasses on. She stops laughing abruptly, grabs my arm and whispers, "She's right behind you." I am alone in an 8-bedroom duplex, connected by a hallway, with 8 ladies who cannot get out of bed. I smile at Em, assure her nothing is there, and then frantically search the house and check all the door and window locks. No one is there, everything is locked up tight. So, I chalk it up to sundowning. Em had dementia in addition to her disabilities, and I fall into my routine of cleaning and laundry between nighttime toileting and turning the residence. The next morning, I recount this to a veteran of the facility who turns very pale before telling me that the last resident who had that room, Shirley, had been less mobility impaired and used to have restless nights where she would grab her walker and roam the house. Shirley was mute and frequently used to startle the night staff by wheeling up behind them. Shirley died in that ducking room. I never picked up an overnight shift there again. I used to work in a large department store, and every year before the Thanksgiving/Black Friday sales we'd go in on Wednesday afternoon and work until midnight to get the store ready. The main lights would all go off after the store's normal closing hours, leaving us working by just a few dim bulbs dotted throughout the store, which made for a lot of spooky dark corners. One year we had a skeleton crew, just me and 3 or 4 other people to do the whole store, so we split up. I was out on the floor, our manager was in her office, and my other co-workers were either in the back or in their designated areas of the store. At some point, I looked up and across the floor to the opposite side of my area. The store was mostly one big open space, and I could easily see over the tops of all the shelves and clothing racks. As I was looking across the space, I saw an arm reach up over one of the racks and wave. It was a creepy sight, because whoever it was would have had to crouch behind one of the racks to avoid being seen, and then reach their arm up over top. And I could see so much of the arm, like all the way to the shoulder, so I really don't know how anyone could have managed that. I waited to see if it was one of my coworkers, but I didn't see anyone come out of that section. I knew none of my coworkers should have been in my area, and we all certainly had better things to do than hide behind racks waving at each other. I called a coworker and asked her to go with me to that section, but we didn't find anyone. I chalked it up to being tired and my eyes playing tricks on me in the dimly lit store, but shit was creepy. When I worked as a nursing aide in a hospital, there was a night where one of the call light in one of the empty rooms kept getting triggered. I walked into the room and turned it off. The room felt eerie. I just wanted to get out of there. Walked back to the nursing station and it went off again. Happened 2 or 3 times. Was the only time I had experienced that while working there. It was an older hospital. Nights were mostly quiet, but some nights you'd hear sounds or think you saw something in the shadows. Definitely had the eerie vibe. I would watch a log yard at night. Take your pick, gunshots echoing on the mountain, being stalked by a mountain lion, or packs of wild dogs/coyotes staring at you through the window. And finally, the truckers returning after dark and having an argument until a pistol is pulled. The mountain lion took the cake. I saw movement, so I went to check it out. The manager had taken in a few stray dogs. At that point I couldn't find them. I looked in the doghouse and all of them were in one, smushed against the back wall and terrified. I knew I had a problem at that point, so I scanned the hillside and spotted the cat watching me. As I walked back to the building it kept pace and looked like it would pounce at any moment. Safe to say, I went into a room with no windows and stayed there all night. Screw the equipment. Okay, so I, 25F, worked night shift at a maximum security psychiatric hospital. As you can probably imagine, these kind of experiences come with the territory. To set the scene for you, the hospital I work at was built in the 50s as an asylum. The concrete walls are cold and sounds echo throughout with relative ease. The pressure differentials between units and the main hall create a haunting howling sound as the air escapes through the cracks under the doors. We typically keep the lights out to encourage patients to sleep through the night. And then there's me, walking the halls alone to check that everyone is still breathing. I've heard people laughing to themselves, whispering conversations to someone unseen by me. I've even ran to emergencies where other patients have snuck into another's room to beat them violently, having to pull a 300+ pound man off another man he attacked in his sleep, all the while he was still stomping on his head. But the scariest thing was when I was doing a round and I came across one of our blind patients. You know how in movies you see people with hallucinations that cut their eyes out looking for relief? No, I didn't find a pair of peepers freshly gouged out, if that's what you were thinking. However, this patient had in fact done exactly this a number of years ago and as a result was completely blind. The worst part is, it didn't make the hallucinations go away, Now all he can see are the haunting visions that brought him to it in the first place. So this patient had been with us for some time, and every night I walk by his room he's in the same position, standing facing the wall with his back to the door. No matter how long I stand there, he doesn't move. This is nothing new though, as I've seen a number of patients with catatonia before. They just stand or sit there with a blank or sometimes fearful expression and react to nothing. So the scary part for me was when I passed by his room, walking quietly so as not to wake any patients, and I peek into his room through the window. He's standing facing the wall. Just before I'm about to continue on with my rounds, I see his head turn, like he heard a voice. He turns around with his empty eye sockets and looks at me. "My name, is that you?" I nearly shit myself. I didn't even know this patient knew my name, let alone that he could tell somehow that it was me standing there. I probably should have reassured him that I was real, but in that moment I was so scared I just kept on walking. I was working for a web hosting company. My shift was 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. I lived in a rural part of Oklahoma, about 20 miles east of Oklahoma City. Most of the houses are farms, and they are separated usually by acres, if not miles of farmland between houses. One night in September, I was driving home exhausted because I had just worked overtime, and it was about 3:30 in the morning. I turned down a road that I don't normally take because I figured, why not? It's in the country. So as I get further away from the city, the darker and more wooded the road gets. I paid no attention as I was tired. I have my headlights on high and I turned down a road headed toward my house. After a while I feel like I've been driving for a really long time down this road with no intersection. But I keep going anyway. All of a sudden I see something in the road, so I stop and look, and it's an entire tree branch, huge branch. Not one I could have just ran over or avoided. Not even thinking logically like there hasn't been any storms or winds, why is there a tree in the road? I proceed to get out of my car and start trying to move this branch. Then I think I hear some things, so I turn the car off but listen. It's someone whistling, in the woods, on land that has no house for miles. I start to get in my car quietly and the whistling stops. I hear footsteps stomping and getting louder. I turned the ducking car on and threw it reverse and slammed the gas down until I got back to the main road. Still haven't been back down that road. I had been working 2 full-time jobs and riding a bicycle to both of them. I was sleep deprived, and on my way home in the middle of the night, I could see the streets, but there was a lot of shadows. As I was moving, the shadows started to friggin' move. They were like water in some places and almost dancing in others. This went on for a few minutes until I got home. I was in a full sweat and just collapsed and slept for a full day. I don't think this was anything more than a hallucination, but to see those shadows move scared the crap out of me. I used to work security as one of my first jobs. Most of it was events, but they'd pick up the random location gig. I get this overnight job watching a gate where they are building a new major road. Wasn't supposed to be any night construction due to the residential area, but some of the contractors were apparently having shit dropped off at night or using as a through fare in a few cases. Now I wasn't supposed to stop them, just take the plate number and company name of any trucks that came through. First night nothing, I got some sleep. Second night, just as I was about to fall asleep, a truck pulled up. See me parked in the shadows and leaves. I decided to pull my car into the light directly, so maybe them seeing me would stop them from even pulling down the street. I'm the type that once my sleep is interrupted it takes a while to get back to sleep, so I was poking around a bit. And that shit started to get odd. Timeline this like 2000. I start hearing a sound like a TIE fighter. Drones aren't everywhere back then, and even though I was about a half mile from a major military base back then, that sound wouldn't make you think drone. That high-pitched electric motor whine just wasn't a normal thing at all. But that's the sound I heard that night, well similar. So heat this TIE fighter whine, and I'm standing on the edge of the canyon they are building this road on. Can't see anything, just this alien sound, close then far, close then far. There was some sort of industrial park down in the canyon they were attaching this road to, exterior lights on. Then they just went off one by one while that sound seemed like it was in that area. Sound went away, all the lights came back on. Few minutes later that sound is back on my side of the canyon. It wasn't a foggy evening, decently clear, but I can't say anything in the sky. That sound is getting louder and I started to get a little freaked, so I locked myself in my car. That drone-like sound got really ducking loud, seemingly right above me, and the streetlight I was under went out. Whatever it was pushing some air, cause I could feel it hitting my car at that point, but I wasn't see anything out the windows. It got really ducking loud for a minute, still just stars above me or as much starlight as you can see in the middle of a city, then silence and the streetlight came back on. Told my boss the next morning to reassign me. This happened around January of 2018. One late night at around 10 o'clock I was coming from work. During this time I was attending community college. At my job I was selling merchandise/catering at events, like at wine parties, concerts, etc. Basically, I wasn't making a lot of money. Anyways, one day I just happened to go past the back wall of the Philadelphia Eastern State Penitentiary, which is a famous location in my city, and according to YouTube, it's one of the top 10 scariest haunted house attractions. I got kind of lost while traveling, but it was a really nice night, which didn't make the trip too bad. I decided to take an unconventional route back home, which is dangerous considering the type of city I lived in and what time it was. Once I was around the penitentiary, I look up and I see the creepy, giant wall with vines all over. Giant concrete bricks aligned the structure and it had large bushes at the bottom. It was like I was in a Goosebumps book or something. The wall went on for maybe a mile or so. I then fell off my bike, yet I couldn't stop staring at that wall. People didn't seem to notice or really care at all. It was like they were NPCs or something. It got very quiet too, which is not unnatural. I knew sooner or later I had to ride past the penitentiary again, but I really wish that this time was the last time I had to even get close to that place. Maybe I'll actually work up the courage to go inside one of these days. But when I fell off my bike, not even for a moment did I take my eyes off that freakishly giant and cold wall. It felt like I was being pulled. I was staring at it for so long the wall started looking distorted, like it was getting bigger, stretching and bending. But I think it was my overwhelming fear that was making me hallucinate. I was also starving too. But then I just felt like something around me had an aura that was almost insidious. It was like I was being surrounded and strangled by a thick fog. When I realized what it was and where I was, I panicked more. I started getting anxious that I couldn't even ride my bike anymore. I was hyperventilating and then frantically picked up my bike and started running the opposite way, taking another route back home. I used to clean office buildings after hours. One night I head out the back to take out the trash of one of the buildings I cleaned regularly, and as I finish tossing the bag in the dumpster and turn around, I see, not 2 feet behind me, is a man, dressed head to toe in a ninja suit. Complete with one of those straight, single-edged Japanese swords, a tanto? This guy, without a sound and very quickly, snuck right up on me and was just standing there, hand on the blade at his back, staring at me. Confused and slightly unsure if I was about to be murdered, I let out a soft, "Wah, what the duck?" The urban ninja then proceeds to Naruto run around my car a couple times, which was parked out back, nearby, and then disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. I survived. When I was 17 I worked the midnight shift at a convenience store in rural West Texas. Except for weekends no one ever came in after 1. Farmers and early risers started coming in about 5:30 in the morning for coffee and breakfast items. My job overnight was basically to clean the store and start cooking food for the next day. Plus run the cash register if anyone did come in. One night about 2 in the morning a couple of guys came in and started walking up and down the aisles. I put down my mop and went behind the counter by the cash register. I finally asked them if I could help them find anything. I was already nervous. One of them replied that they wanted directions to Amarillo, the closest city in the area. I gave them directions and they left. About half an hour later I opened the back door to take out trash. The same 2 guys were parked in the alley behind the store. When I came out they drove off. I was terrified the rest of the night. I've always believed that they were just waiting to come back in and rob the place, and when the back door opened it startled them enough to get out of there. I was only 17 and that night scared me. I worked night shift in a hospital. I was walking by a long hallway that was lined with windows, and I was looking out the windows. You could see the reflection of what was behind you through the windows. And I caught a glimpse of an old lady in a gown holding a 4-pole, and she looked a bit surprised that I saw her, like she wasn't supposed to be there. And my first thought was it was a patient that was walking out of her room at night during shift change. And I turned to where she was supposed to be to ask if she's okay, if she needs any help or a walker or anything, and there was no one there. I just said nope and kept walking. Worked the night shift as a nurse in a general hospital. There were the normal scary things, like the haunted rooms where the bell rang itself every night and you never saw somebody in there or leaving the room. The hospital was built in long hallways with doors on the left and right. In the old part the rooms were quite small and the lights gave you more shadows than light. The scariest thing took place over a few days. It started with female patients ringing for the nurse and telling there was a ghost tickling their feet in their sleep. They all told the same story about a slender figure in a white gown standing at the end of their bed with a grin on its face which looked more like a skull and just tickling their feet. There was no sign of anybody coming or leaving, but the heavy doors from the stairways to the hallways was open at all time, so no sign there. On male patient on the opposite hallway across the staircase told us about somebody staying next to his bed every night just watching him sleep. It was the other patient from his room just standing there. This man had really bad dementia and his day-night rhythm completely changed. It was also him sneaking in other rooms and tickling the women's feet. We don't know how we never catched him. So we told the doctors and they tried to sedate him when he started to act violently against us after discovering his nightly actions and trying to stop him. Cause of his dementia, it had the opposite effect and he got more crazy and agitated. We closed all doors to protect the other patients and he tried to get in and even tried to convince me he was someone else, couldn't see through the doors, and to open for him. Changed his voice, told different stories like 5 to 6 times a night. It got really scary. He was finally moved to another facility. So I, 33M, worked in a nursing home, still do but in a different one. The nursing home was home to around 200 people. A few years ago, in the middle of the night, my coworker called me on my phone to tell me to lock all the balcony doors. I checked every door I could find and called her back. My coworker sounded scared and did not know what to do. She told me where she was and I walked to her. She was around the corner of the reception. As I came close to her, I heard loud banging and screaming. It was around 2 a.m. There was a guy loudly banging on the glass door. Turned out he was banging on windows too and scaring the people that live there. He was yelling at us to let him in. The guy was between 35 to 45 years old and built athletic, hence the reason why the balcony doors had to locked. After trying to calm him down and figure out what was actually happening and why he was banging on the door, my coworkers became even more scared. He was becoming even more angry. At the precise moment he wanted to throw a brick or something through the window, someone from the security showed up. Security is on call out here. That was just a coincidence cause nobody called the security yet. Turns out the security guy knew the man. The man was treated in an open mental institution a few blocks away and did not return at the end of the day. Used to work at a large newspaper in a big, multi-story building. One week I had a big project, so I was working really late and left at about 2 in the morning, no one else on my floor at all, and most of the lights were out. Now, there were rumors that building was haunted, ancient Indian burial ground or something. I don't really believe in ghosts, so I wasn't thinking of it at the time. Until I got in the elevator. I get in and it's super quiet and the whole floor is dark, already very creepy. I hit the button for the parking garage and nothing happens. Okay. Weird. I hit the button again. Nothing. The doors are wide open and I'm staring into what might as well be the back room's creepypasta. I hit the button again and again, imagining something jumping out of the darkness to kill me. I'm kind of freaking out at this point. That's when I realized I wasn't hitting the button for my floor, I was hitting the door open button on the elevator. Rolled my eyes and hit the right button and the elevator doors started to close. And that's when I really freaked out, because in the horror movies that's always when people get attacked. Nothing happened, thankfully. 6 years ago I worked for some months as a private security agent for a local real estate agency that owns multiple villas. One night, at around 4 a.m., we receive a call from the automated system telling us an alarm went off in a villa, so we drive there and start looking around. While my colleague goes inside and starts looking in every corner of the 200 square meters apartment, I turn on the lights outside and go check the patio. I hear some leaves cracking rumors, but being in a villa I don't give it too much attention, thinking it's just a dog/cat. On the way to the pool, separated from the villa by a metal fence and a gate for kids' security reasons, I notice the bushes a little ahead of me moving, and immediately after I see a long, very long and thin unmoving leg coming out of one of the bushes. It's in a way that lets me understand the owner of it was going into the bush, but eventually freezed when he or she/it heard me getting closer. Since I am some steps away and the light isn't that strong, I decide to go to my car to take the LED torch, but when I'm back the leg is not there anymore, so I think, well, I must have seen a branch or something, and go on with the patrol. When I get to the pool I notice the gate is opened and proceed to close it, locking it. I call my colleague, we go to our car to end our little check, but as soon as we're about to hop into our car we hear the pool gate opening. We rush there with the torches, but obviously the only thing we see is the gate opened and the lock on the ground. My colleague tells me it's my fault cause obviously I did not lock the gate carefully and the non-existent wind open it again. The morning after, the owner of the real estate agency tells us some km away there's a drug-addicted facility where people is helped with their problems, and that the guests of this facility have a 1 free night per week, so maybe someone decided to have a little fun in the pool. Fast forward to 2 nights after the episode, we receive another call from the system regarding the same exact villa. Everything goes exactly the same. My colleague goes inside and I check the patio/pool. Everything's perfect, pool's gate is closed, so we proceed to shut everything off and go to the car. While walking to the car we have a jump scare. A middle-aged woman is standing right outside the villa's entrance, beside our car. Taking into account my clock signs 2 a.m., some shivers go down my spine. She smiles and tells us she's harvesting asparagus. I genuinely ask her, Isn't it a little too late to wander all alone in a place like this with no lights? She turns to me, smiles with what I perfectly remember is the creepiest smile I've ever seen and replies, "Trust me kid, nothing is going to happen to me, I know it," and proceed greeting us and continuing her walk. We decide to quickly jump into the car and get away. The next day we asked our manager to assign the villa to another unit. To this day I'm still overwhelmed with goosebumps when I think at the leg and at the lady harvesting asparagus in the middle of the night and in complete darkness. I work construction in a cemetery now and for the past 6 months and haven't experienced anything, but I did about 10 years ago. My ex and I went to visit Wyatt Earp's grave because I'm a huge fan of the Old West. My ex used to work on one of those paranormal TV shows and is big into that field, so she had her voice recorder with her when we went. We got there in the late afternoon on a Saturday. There was nobody in sight other than a couple of guys doing landscaping off in the distance. After visiting the Wyatt Earp grave we saw another elaborate one nearby. It had those laugh now cry later clown mask designs on it. We googled the name of the person buried there and he was some old Russian actor. She pulled out her recorder and started asking questions. It began to get dark and the cemetery was closing, so we started our hour-long drive home. In the car she plays her voice recorder. Nothing while at the Wyatt Earp grave, but when we got to the actor's grave she asked, "Is there anyone here with us that would like to communicate?" Clear as day you can hear a woman's voice say yes. Now it wasn't my ex because I was standing right next to her when she asked that, and it wasn't another live woman because there wasn't one anywhere in the cemetery. We never figured out what said yes. I don't work nights anymore, but the place I working at was a casino and I was a surveillance op. I worked the grave shift and one night I heard a knock on the door and only the managers and directors have the access to request things from surveillance. I checked the live feed from the camera outside the door and there was nobody there, and I looked through the peephole in the door and there was no one there either. I heard the knocks a few more times throughout the night into the early morning hours, along with what sounded like my name being called here and there. The casino I worked for was built on reservation land that, from what I learned from my mom, had a lot of fist fights, knife fights, and maybe a demonic presence on site. I ultimately ended up quitting when I moved to Arizona a couple years back, but I saw a lot of orbs and shadow people as well, and weird sounds, and even got scratched once while sitting in the office. Okay. This is hard to talk about because it actually gave me nightmares. One night it was just me and my other coworker. The restaurant had recently decided to go open 24 hours and we got stuck with the night shift. He would chill at the front while I would handle food in the back. One night I was cleaning the roof and he started talking about some creepy-ass urban legend. A person who accidentally cut his own hand off and was hit by a bus later that night. At his funeral his bosses fired him as one last duck you egg. Telling me his spirit haunts our restaurant every Tuesday night. He was just trying to scare me, right? After a few hours the lights started flickering. Even though the power box seemed fine. When I went to the front to check on my coworker the phone rang, so I answered it. Nobody answered, so it must have been a prank call like. Just as I was going back to the freezer a whole ass bus pulled up to the front of our restaurant. Only one guy got off and started walking towards the place. Creepy as f. My coworker came out with me and asked who he was, but I didn't know. I'll never forget what I saw that night. Once he came to the door he started tapping on the glass. We started getting nervous. I went to the doors and saw that he was tapping on the glass. With a spatula for a hand. Absolutely terrifying. I try not to think about it. Worked at a school bus company on graveyard shift. I lived in a place where it was commonly minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit or colder, and we were expected to clear snow and throw salt, and then start, fuel and stage the buses. There was a hole in one of our perimeter fences, and management knew about it, and decided that the horrible lighting and obsolete CCTV was enough of a deterrent. One night it was close to minus 45 degrees with the wind chill factor, and it was so cold that even the winter blend diesel fuel was not wanting to flow very well. Took forever to get through the fleet, but we got it done. Usually at this point we were expected to do a walkthrough on the lot as a security measure. Went out when it was my turn to take a pass and I heard something fumbling about near one of the buses. I figured it was a rabbit or a squirrel or something and didn't really think to be on guard. As I walk past the back corner of the bus I see a guy in chest waders and a hoodie with a straw hat on in the process of siphoning fuel from one of the buses, and I lit him up with a 1500 lumen flashlight and told him to kick rocks as I radioed the supervisor to call the police. The guy jumps up and starts screaming incoherently at me, and I realized the dude was high out of his mind. I gathered this already, but I had pretty solid confirmation at this point. I begin to get ready to take off as he start to change at me with a tire iron. Guy takes 3 steps and slips ass over tea kettle and splits the back of his head open on the pavement. He jumps back up and takes off through the hole in the fence. Cops showed up and took my statement. Boss came in and he was absolutely not surprised that something happened. At that point he told me that company policy strictly forbids us to have a weapon of any kind on our person while on the property. He then stated that if he doesn't know, he can't say anything, but he wouldn't let me get crucified if I had to use one. I lived next to a cemetery. My backyard and the cemetery had half a fence dividing the two. I used to walk out there at night when I couldn't sleep and go get stoned. I was in a real dark place in my life, very depressed. It was one of the oldest graveyards in our town. It had all kinds of graves from the early 1800s. Lots of newborn graves. There was one grave I liked, because it had a stone bench kind of connecting the two. It was one of the older graves. It was kind of FSR in and wasn't the best place to sit. It was run down, but I liked it for some reason. It always called out to me as good place to sit and smoke. It was just a weird feeling I had. When it'd sit there the wind wouldn't make me cold, my feet would be warm, and critters would start to stir. The raccoons would come check me out, crows would waylay up and caw at me, coyotes would cross the creek and take a lap. It was just a weird little spot. One night I read the headsons. It had belonged to a young husband and wife in their 20s, around my age at the time, that died less than a week apart. She had killed herself in grief after her husband had been murdered. It just struck me funny. It's hard to explain the vibe, but that spot had just called out to me for a while, and it kind of shook me that it happened to be the most brutal one in the whole place. After that, it'd always bring a little something for them on my midnight walks. I even said bye when I moved out of that house. A few times I used to visit this spooky cemetery with a couple of friends when I was still in primary school between 2002 and 2003. Because morbid curiosity and I like doing genealogy type stuff, still do, and have located a few family members' family information and graves doing research. Anyway, it's an old cemetery going back to the 19th century, so it has really old graves and covers 10 hectares of land, so there's a lot to explore, like war graves, victims of the influenza pandemic, military graves, and mausoleums. As a side note, as of today the cemetery is now at capacity, 27,867 internments, and our city council is only accepting ash burials or burials for pre-existing plots there. The earthquakes our city had in 2011 and 2013 has severely damaged a lot of the graves, unfortunately too. Luckily my family graves fared okay. Anyway, back to the story. On one occasion my mates and I went to the section with the older graves going back as far as 1918. A lot of the tombstones and monuments had collapsed or were badly cracked, so we couldn't get much information from them. Some of the engraved words had been completely weathered away, but the granite ones remained in good condition and we could decipher the names and dates of some of the gravestones. All of a sudden, and inexplicably, as we went past a row of graves, we felt this sudden shift in temperature and atmosphere. It's really hard to explain, but it was so poignant I can still recall the eerie feeling that came over us. One of my friends started crying. She did do this often and for no reason, but in this case it was suitable, and my other mate was like, "Let's go," and was really freaked out. I didn't need telling twice, and we all booked it out of one of the entrances onto one of the residential streets, breathing hard and heart pounding. I can't remember the conversation or the dialogue that followed, but I can imagine it went along the lines of, "WTF was that, and what did we just experience?" As 11 to 12-year-olds at the time, it was terrifying. We didn't go back after that experience. Even going now an adult brings that uneasy memory back. Fast forward to a few years later and I am still in contact with both of my friends from primary school. We happened to mention that day in the cemetery and my friend said something that scared the shit out of me and didn't know at the time. If I did, I would have had nightmares. She says to me that she just didn't get a bad feeling, she actually saw something glide by the row of graves we just went past. It was completely black like a cape-like figure, and it turned to grin with an awful wide-like smile. Whatever it was, she said, was evil and not human. I worked at a Smashburger in Mesa, Arizona. We had 2 different female employees request not to close anymore. Of course we asked why. First one, the store assistant GM no less, said that she was leaving after a long Saturday night close. It was pouring rain, and it was only her car and another in the parking lot. As she walked to her car, the guy in the other car got out and just stared at her as she got into hers. The second employee, a 16-year-old, told an even scarier encounter. A dude came in and asked her when she was off. Luckily a manager was up front and heard, and quickly told the dude that we aren't legally allowed to give that information, even about ourselves. He sat in the dining room without ordering for a few minutes and then left. That night, this girl was followed home by a car. She said she did the 4 lefts thing, so she was certain. She apparently called her dad and had him waiting outside the house with a gun when she pulled in, and the car kept driving. The first girl didn't get a good look at the guy, but both reported him having a gray minivan. My first night closing at the store, I was by far the last person there. It was well into the morning, And let me tell you the way my stomach dropped when I was about to walk outside and a gray minivan was parked right next to my car. Police were called, but they unfortunately couldn't do anything but tell him to leave, and let them know we'd press charges if he came back, as it was technically private property. As far as I know, he's never been back, but man, it was scary.